originally from Bolzano, from Alto Adige. I did a very technical high school back in the days. In 1994, there was an exhibition in Bolzano of the famous artist Walter Pichler. Walter was one of the driving forces of radical architecture, design and art scene in Vienna. He was the one that was telling me that I should try to go to Vienna at the University of Applied Arts, which I did then when I finished high school. My name is Peter Pichler, founder of Peter Pichler Architecture, and this is the Architect series. What happened then also in this period was an internship that actually happened before even I entered the University of Applied Arts, and in London, where I was pretty much excited. So I got this opportunity to do an internship at Zaha Hadid. There's this story the first time where I met Zaha. It was my first working day in London. I was just waiting in Studio 9 to get introduced to the team. And I asked the secretary there for the restrooms, and she explained me something, you go down, left, right. I ended up in the restroom that just Zaha is allowed to use, actually. And that's the first time where I met her, and she was, of course, asking like what I'm doing in her restroom. And I was known as Peter, the Italian intern that used Zaha's toilet at my first working day, where I thought it was my last day in London. But then I was studying with her, and I was then also, after graduating, working with her in her studio for a couple of years.
I'm Silvia Martinez. I'm co-founder of Peter Pichler Architecture. Peter and I met back in 2014 in Mallorca, the place where I come from. And during that moment, we were both going through difficult periods of our lives. I started working as a model when I was 5 years old. And then I started tourism while I was working in our construction and real estate family company in Mallorca, while I was horse riding at a very high level. But I felt I was not satisfied with my life. And it was when we met, actually during our first holiday, summer holiday together.
So we decided to start this adventure together and found an architecture studio in Milan in 2015 here.
He would be the architect and the creative, and I would take care of all the rest. All the finance, marketing, communication, human resources.
And we thought Milan is the right place to be. There was the expo in that moment, and somehow we believed, 100% in the potential of Italy in general, and we thought that Milan is the right place right now to start this adventure, let's say.
We were growing together during these years in a personal and in a professional way. We got married. We thought at the beginning that maybe it's going to be difficult to work together and have a family together, but actually it's working very well because we do totally different things. Now we have 2 daughters also that are always coming to the office, Tilda and Olivia, and they love playing here and drawing with the guys. So we have them here very often. And also we bring them to events and to talks because we have no other choice actually, but it's very funny to have them part of our journey.
I think Peter Pichler Architecture today is an emerging Italian studio with an international young team with diversity and different backgrounds. I think the credo of our studio is for sure the tradition and the evolution of tradition. So we are definitely interested in vernacular architecture. What inspired myself a lot is the architect Bernard Rudowski, who also had a show in the MoMA in New York in the 60s, which was called Architecture Without Architects. So he basically analyzed vernacular architecture of hundreds and hundreds of years ago, where there was not the classic profession of the architect as we know it today.
Sono Simona Alu, sono senior architect, faccio parte della famiglia PPA da quando è iniziata questa avventura quasi circa 8 anni fa, quindi inizio 2016. In ogni progetto l'obiettivo perseguito è quello di creare un edificio che sia qualcosa di nuovo, che dialoghi con il contesto, ma che al tempo stesso, rispettando la cultura di un luogo, lo reinterpreti.
We really go back and research the history of a place, we research the tradition of a place, and we try to give a contemporary answer to that. Sustainability is key for us. As a young emerging studio, it's a big responsibility in general. And we know that 40% of the global emissions are really coming from our industry. And for us, I think sustainability starts with an intelligent geometry, with since the beginning an analysis with the engineers to develop an intelligent structure and not put a lot of machines at the end. I highly believe that sustainability is building with quality, that it's something long-standing, and that adds, like, I would say, a cultural value to an architecture, to a specific task, I would say.
Un elemento caratterizzante proprio di tutti i processi progettuali dello studio è la tendenza a studiare il progetto nella sua totalità, quindi un approccio olistico in cui andiamo a considerare contemporaneamente i diversi fattori, dalle geometrie, i volumi funzionali, i materiali, le relazioni spaziali.
We're based in Italy, but we are working also abroad, so we have different projects outside Europe as well, and we think that the culture is very important to understand, and that is part with sustainability for us, so to understand where you're building, what is available there, and how can you give an answer to a specific problem. Architecture is definitely part of sustainability, but I think also the sustainability goes way beyond just, an architectural project.
My name is Niklas Knapp. I have been working at Peter Pichler for 3 years as a project architect. The Bonfiglioli headquarters is located in Bologna in Italy. It's a headquarters for Bonfiglioli, which is about 6,000 square meters. The main concept of the building was to create a centerpiece of this larger master plan called Evo, where Bonfiglioli asked us to design a headquarter. The headquarter was supposed to represent Bonfiglioli and to feature a lot of different methods of including sustainability into the design. So our initial approach was to create an object or a building that had a certain geometry which was supporting this idea. So you will notice when you look at the building that it has a very, very steep roof, which is quite striking. And that came from the idea that we had very early on, trying to minimize the facade that is facing south and maximize the facade that is facing north.
The geometry itself, it's already reflecting sustainability. So the whole project is based on the fact that Northlight is the best in offices. So this is really something that we evolved through the geometry itself. So it's almost like we maximized the north facade and sloped down the roof towards south, and we added a custom pleated mesh that filters the harsh light on the south facade, that you have like a comfortable work environment there and save energy at the same time.
The idea of implementing a mesh facade onto the building was to even further improve the interior quality of the office space, because even though we already had this particular shape of the building that reduces the south-oriented facades, there will still be office space in this part of the building. So in order to make this a comfortable office space, we applied this mesh facade as a sort of second skin, which has a sort of pleated geometry, and sort of the density of the mesh together with the pleating helps to reduce the amount of sunlight that hits inside the building, but you will still have a nice and clear view from inside looking out.
We have a few projects which we would almost call radical tourism, which is less a typical hotel structure, but it's more like single structures that emerge like in a symbiosis almost with the landscape, with the forest. We strongly believe that the relationship between human being and nature is crucial. We're talking here about almost something like a slowdown tourism. So it's not about this more is more, what happened the last years that you need to have a lot of amenities, but I think it's going back to simplicity somehow, and it's going back to the relationship of human being and nature. I strongly believe that even if you need to go out of this tree house and you need to walk to the restaurant and it's snowing or raining, I think it's about the experience that you have there. And I think it's about, if you look out of those structures, that you can feel the nature, that you're part of it. And this is the concept for those projects. I think it's also that you have less footprint with single structures instead of having like the classic hotel project, for example. And it's also not this classic experience where you enter in a hotel, you park down the garage, you take the elevator, I think it's not about that. I think it's going back to simplicity and going back to the connection with nature.
My name is Natalia Rotelli. I've been working here for 3 years, and I'm currently a project architect in Peter Pichler. In the vertical chalets, we can also see like the roof shapes, how they are, so it's all the relationship with the local architecture. In the Una, we also have the idea of the mesh and the lamellas, creating a replication of local elements that they are in the architecture itself.
The project we developed here in Europe, the UNA projects or a project in the US, they're somehow similar, let's say, in terms of landscape. But there are different aspects in terms of how you use those buildings. If there is a public building, like for example the project we do in Austria and Germany, there is a mountain hut that in this case works as a reception, restaurant, bar. Or there is just, like in the US, there are just the single units where you basically cook inside these units and you're almost like independent. The idea is to push those projects to an off-the-grid system so that you produce your own energy there without being connected to the grid. So that's the next level where we want to push those projects.
The idea of using the local techniques and the architecture itself, so it really reflects on the project. In Una and the vertical chalets, which has this Austrian Alpine architecture, even the choice of the materials, besides the local wood, the colors and the architectural elements really is different from US. So also the techniques that we use for the construction itself are different, which reflects in the project. So we try to stay as true as possible for where we are building and the relationship that we have with the local community and the local traditions.
I think, again, like sustainability, it's somehow the same, but it's still a different approach in different countries because, for example, the projects we're doing in the Middle East, so we try to involve tradition like the mesh rabbia in those projects that filters the light, so we give it a contemporary interpretation of these patterns, but at the same time, of course, respects always the logic, the function that it's where it comes from, let's say. The Schkaguler Hotel is a very interesting example for sustainability because it was actually a competition and there was a big discussion because it was an existing hotel to either tear down the entire hotel and rebuild it new or to restructure it. And so we went for the option to restructuring it in a contemporary way. And I think that's something very, very important these days, to not always build new and tear down, but somehow to reuse an existing structure. And this is what happened in that hotel. That of course changed the aesthetics in a radical way, and was somehow introduced this kind of Alpine minimalism.
È un progetto che ha una forte identità, ma che al tempo stesso cerca comunque di rispettare il luogo in cui si inserisce, reinterpretando però quelli che sono i caratteri principali poi del luogo stesso in cui si trova. L'idea dell'Hôtel Gulen nasce dalla volontà di creare un forte legame tra l'edificio e il contesto, la natura. L'hotel gode di una vista mozzafiato sullo Scigliar e quindi la trasparenza è un carattere fondamentale che abbiamo voluto perseguire, quindi dall'interno gli ambienti sembrano quasi proseguire verso il paese e verso la montagna, e viceversa anche questo rapporto viene mantenuto dall'esterno verso l'interno.
So we wanted to create a transparent building that is opening towards the mountain. We have a facade that is more open towards the north, and where we have the loggias towards south is more deep and creates a natural shading. But again, it creates this very open building and with local materials and this calmness, I would say, as well, that we wanted to achieve there. And I think it's, going away from these overloaded tourism projects in the Alps to have something that is truly inspired by the mountains and by the landscape with local materials.
Un punto fondamentale di questo progetto è che il committente, come accade spesso in Alto Adige per il settore alberghiero, ci ha chiesto di realizzare questo progetto in soli 4 mesi. Quindi fin dall'inizio è stata una richiesta ardua, ma anche una sfida entusiasmante, e resa ancora più interessante dal fatto che si trattasse di una ristrutturazione, quindi con tutte le problematiche ad essa legate. E quindi la difficoltà nella fase esecutiva è stata quella di trovare le soluzioni migliori per poter rispondere quindi alle richieste del cliente, per cercare appunto di realizzare l'edificio nei tempi richiesti e al tempo stesso però di portare avanti quella che era la nostra idea progettuale, quindi quella di realizzare questi 3 monoliti. Per le strutture e per le logge si è scelto di utilizzare il legno perché è un materiale versatile e con diversi vantaggi, quindi ci ha permesso innanzitutto di poter poi fabbricare molti degli elementi strutturali ancora prima dell'inizio del cantiere, e inoltre è un materiale quindi facilmente lavorabile e modificabile, quindi in questo modo il legno poteva essere adattato anche alle situazioni che andavamo a trovare in cantiere. È un materiale quindi che ha permesso di ridurre i tempi del cantiere e al tempo stesso, trattandosi di un edificio esistente, quindi anche rispetto a una struttura in cemento armato, i carichi che vanno a gravare sulle strutture esistenti col legno sono nettamente minori. Il progetto Milamontis è un albergo a Maranza, quindi in Valpusteria. È un esempio di architettura vernacolare, quindi un'architettura che riprende i caratteri del luogo in cui va a inserirsi.
It's very important where the structure is, like that it's rooted in the history of a very typical barn structure, but still to give it a contemporary interpretation of it. So it has this dark wood facade, this dark shell on the outside, but it's more bright on the inside, so it has this contrast between this outside shell and this indoor space.
Fin dall'inizio abbiamo cercato di studiare il contesto, quindi il luogo in cui l'edificio va a inserirsi, gli edifici anche circostanti, perché la richiesta del cliente era quella di una volumetria abbastanza importante, quindi si è deciso di organizzare questo volume in orizzontale per ridurre proprio l'impatto e al tempo stesso di dividere questo edificio in più volumi, quindi è stato diviso in 4 volumi di dimensioni diverse in modo tale da riprendere le dimensioni delle tipiche case di montagna circostanti.
We believe that structure is beautiful. We don't want to hide it, but we want to amplify it with our projects. For example, if you look at the Oberholz mountain hut, you see this interior structure. It has a certain logic, it has a certain rhythm, and you should feel that. If you look at most of our projects, also in hotel projects, you would see kind of exoskeleton structure. So it's a structure that you see on the facade. One thing is the building tradition, but the other thing is the social aspect. I think that if you work in different countries, like everybody lives in a different way and everybody has different expectations. So I think it's very, very important as an architect to live the place at least for a while in order to understand that. I think you cannot do a project just visiting a site for half an hour and then leaving again the next day. I think you really need to understand it deeper. You need to understand the culture in order to be able to give an answer to something.
This is Cem Özbaşaran. I'm working at PPA since 5 years under the title of project architect. The Castellasov project is located in Alto Adige in Termeno. It is located on the uphill of a vineyard basically. It is done for a private client, a villa.
The problem there was the wind that comes from Lago di Garda, which is called Ora. The client, when we first met there, said she would like to have a villa, but she would like to use the space outside. And the problem with the wind is that, especially also in summer, the wind on this hill, on this beautiful vineyard, is so strong that you almost can't be outside. So we create a kind of ribbon-like structure that emerges from the landscape to create an internal courtyard where you're protected from this wind. So this is something when I talk about transforming a problem into potential and to then understand the logic of the design.
It is crucial to adapt to this local culture. So from the material to the construction techniques, we try to get as much as possible from the lot. For example, the finishing of the exterior is a product and a style that is used, taking inspiration from the local construction techniques. Also in the interior, we try to use as much as possible the local materials in a way to dialogue with the context as much as possible.
The first project we are doing in the Middle East came like out of the blue. It was an email, I remember well, that I discussed with Silvana. We didn't even have the office. It was an email like asking us if we want to do a villa in Abu Dhabi for the owner, for himself and his 2 sons. And we actually saw this as a spam email. But like Silvana suggested, we should write back. And a couple of weeks later, we were in Abu Dhabi. We got, to see the history of that country and to understand the culture of the client, which for us is fundamental in order to be able to do a project. And that's how this project started.
In this case, we try to use the local culture also. And from this one, we extracted the use of mashrabia, which are the sun screening panels. This one we try to implement in our design in the facade. Also, we tried to implement these canyon structures that create some semi-private spaces and that connect in an inner courtyard.
It's a contemporary interpretation of certain elements like the mashrabiyah or like spaces like the majlis, which are spaces where you, in their culture, you sit down, you chat, you have a coffee, you have a tea. So this was something that inspired us, like all this program and all this, let's say, patterns, for example, to then design this project. The vision, I think, is in the future to push that studio to new boundaries, to explore other fields, to be inspired, I think, by other people as well. What I'm interested is to go beyond just the architecture world and to talk with people from different fields. I think that's something that really inspires me, like to not just talk within the architecture community, but just to go out there and listen what other people have to say and to learn from that. I think that's something that is part of the future, I think.
I hope we can expand this office that we already did in 2018. At the beginning we were a very small office, then we expanded. We are just a bigger studio, and I hope we can just expand to the other direction of this office. We can throw these walls and have a bigger space.
I think you should listen to yourself, like what you really like, and just go in that direction, and don't listen too much what others are thinking or saying. Just really try to listen what makes you happy. And I think if you're happy doing your job, I think you will do it always great and better than somebody that is forced to do it.